Channel 7, KABC-TV, Los Angeles.
Good evening. I'm Howard K. Smith in Washington. Harry Reasoner's on vacation. These are tonight's headlines. The Watergate cover-up trial jury convicts John Mitchell, H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, and Robert Mardian. The jury acquits Kenneth Parkinson, the fifth defendant. Supreme Court Justice William Douglas suffers a stroke and is under intensive care at the Walter Reed Army Hospital. And tonight, a comment on the fallen leaders of government during 1974. The jury on the Watergate cover-up trial delivered its verdict today after 15 hours of deliberation over a 3-day period. 4 of the defendants, John Mitchell, H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, and Robert Mardian, guilty on all counts. Only one defendant, Kenneth Parkinson, the former attorney for the Nixon Re-Election Committee, was found not guilty. Details from ABC's David Shoemaker.
Jury foreman John Hoffer had carried in the verdict inside a brown envelope. And now the 5 defendants stood erect with shoulders squared to hear the decision. The tension was overwhelming as Judge Sirica studied the verdict for many minutes. Then finally, it was read by the judge's longtime clerk, James Capitano. John Mitchell, count 1, conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. Count 2, obstruction of justice, guilty. 2 counts of making false declarations to a grand jury, guilty. And perjury before Senator Sam Ervin's Watergate Committee, guilty. Mitchell sagged, then looked down at his attorneys, told them not to take it too hard. H.R. Haldeman was next. Conspiracy, guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. 3 counts of perjury before the Senate Watergate Committee, guilty. Haldeman, once Richard Nixon's chief of staff, his alter ego, according to some, stared straight ahead, unblinking. Then John Ehrlichman, already under sentence in the Plumbers case, conspiracy, guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. Making false declarations to the grand jury, guilty. Ehrlichman's eyes seemed fixed on some point beyond the judge. Robert Mardian, charged with only 1 count, conspiracy, but guilty. And finally, Kenneth Wells Parkinson, a lawyer for the committee to re-elect the president. Count 1, conspiracy, not guilty. Count 2, obstruction of justice, not guilty. A big smile broke out on Parkinson's face. His lawyer reached up to slap his back. Parkinson was still elated as he left the courthouse.
Well, obviously, I'm thrilled with today's verdict. With respect to me, I've always had faith that this would be the outcome. I'd like to thank all of my friends who've supported me through this difficult period. I'd like to thank my wife, Pamela, and one of the greatest lawyers in the country, perhaps in the world, Jake Stein.
At this minute.
It was more than an hour, and a cold front had roared past the courthouse, dumping high winds and sleet on those waiting, before H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman came out to make their statements.
I'd just like to make a very brief statement, simply to say that there's only one human being in the world who knows to an absolute moral certainty the truth of my innocence or guilt. I know that legally and morally I am totally innocent of each of the charges that's been brought here, and with that certainty I can live with myself, and I can move ahead now to see that as this process continues, the truth ultimately does become known and become understood. I have the full conviction that ultimately it will, and with that I intend to move ahead in the days ahead on the process of appeal within the judicial system.
I felt strongly, and my attorneys advised me very plainly, that Mr. Nixon's testimony was absolutely essential to the establishment of our defense. When the judge ruled that we couldn't wait 5 more days to take his deposition, that was, for my money at least, the major turning point in whether or not this verdict was going to be a statement about my innocence or was simply going to be a statement about the evidence that was presented in the courtroom.
John Mitchell and Robert Mardian left the courthouse together, roaring out an underground garage in Mitchell's chauffeured limousine. Sentencing will be delayed for several weeks. Mitchell and Haldeman face up to 25 years in prison, Ehrlichman up to 20, Mardian up to 5. But of course, before any sentences are served, there will be lengthy appeals stretching out for a year or more. But tonight, after 15 hours of deliberation, or by another count, after 2 years and 7 months, the case that began when those 5 men entered the Watergate in the dead of night, that case is finally closed. David Shoemaker, ABC News, Washington.
News of the verdict reached President Ford as he was in his last day of vacation at Vail, Colorado. ABC White House correspondent Tom Jarrell has a report.
Convicted in Washington was completing his winter vacation at Vail, west of Denver. As he has practically every day, the president spent the morning skiing and was back at his temporary White House headquarters when the verdict came in. Aides say the president was watching television and learned of the jury's decision through a news bulletin. About an hour and a half after the verdict, a White House spokesman said President Ford would have no comment, no statement on the outcome. Having faced harsh public reaction to his hasty pardoning of Richard Nixon, the president earlier established his guidelines for handling other Watergate figures. He's on record as being against any blanket pardon for those convicted. Instead, individual requests for pardon must be made through the normal established channels at the Justice Department. White House News Secretary Ron Nessen has said there will be no outright pardons at the president's initiative. The only major Watergate figure to attempt to obtain a pardon has been former counsel Charles Colson. His request has bogged down in the bureaucratic channels and never been put before the president for a decision. Tom Jarrell, ABC News, with the presidential party in Colorado.
Prosecutor James Neal told reporters he is resigning from the special prosecutor's office to go back to his law practice in Nashville. He said he would leave on the first available airplane.
Mary, how much I was Mary? Where's our Rolaids?
Acid indigestion.
No. Try these. They're good. Good, maybe, but they're not Rolaids.
In this medical report, Rolaids active ingredient was medically recognized safe and effective, taken as directed. Rolaids, with no extra ingredients not intended for your stomach, consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid. Rolaids ingredient, medically recognized, safe and effective.
All right, class. Let's have no more static. I'm getting enough static from this sore throat with my cold.
Now Joan really needs her Listerine lozenges for fast, effective sore throat pain relief. Tests show their special cooling ingredient gives a feeling of relief fast, and their medically proven anesthetic keeps on relieving sore throat pain. Listerine lozenges turn off the static of a sore throat fast.
And just that fast, I'm ready for my class again.
ABC's David Shoemaker has been covering the Watergate affair ever since a special prosecutor was first appointed about over a year ago, and I'd like to ask David some questions. He's at the courthouse now. David, I know that you did not want to prejudice public opinion by saying so, but have you felt and not said so that this verdict would be reached today?
Yes, Howard, I would say that certainly I was not surprised. I don't think anyone in the courtroom was really surprised. Certainly all of the defendants have said quite frankly, although privately to me along the way, that they expected guilty verdicts. Only Robert Mardian, who always seemed outraged at the very idea he was in the courtroom, and Kenneth Parkinson, who seemed to be quite sad that he was there. Those were the only two men who maintained their innocence and predicted that there would be an innocence verdict all along.
David, it took the Teapot Dome scandal 7 years to get through all its litigation in the 1920s. Now, within 2 years of the president admitting there was a problem, President Nixon, we have this climactic event. What else lies ahead in the legal field? Are there other trials to go through aside from the appeals?
Well, there are several trials, and we would expect that grand juries will shortly be returning verdicts. We can't predict, will be returning indictments. We can't predict with any certainty, but we know that several investigations are still underway in the Special Prosecutor's Office. One is the investigation of Maurice Stans, who was the chairman of the Finance Committee to re-elect the president, the man who collected so much of the money for the committee to re-elect the president's operations. There is still the investigation underway into the affairs of Charles B.B. Rebozo, Richard Nixon's longtime friend, and that, of course, could have terrible ramifications for Richard Nixon. And then finally, there is the trial already scheduled in March of John Connally, the former Secretary of the Treasury.
David, the unique thing about this Watergate thing, one of the unique things was that a president taped his intimate conversations dealing with a crime. Had he not done that peculiar thing, could this verdict have been reached today with only John Dean's evidence?
We'll never know that, will we? Certainly the prosecutors and the defense counsel both think that it was the major element. We heard hours and hours of testimony from the stand, and James Neal, near the very end of his final rebuttal and closing argument, told the jurors if there is any doubt in their mind, they should ask for two tapes, the tape of June 23rd, just a few days after the break-in, when the president and H.R. Haldeman discussed using the Central Intelligence Agency to block the FBI investigation, and the second tape of March 21st, when the two men, in the presence of H.R. Haldeman and John Dean and the president, all discussed the $1 million ransom demands of Howard Hunt. Neil said, listen to those two tapes and you'll know what to do. Last night, after asking for all of the tapes, the jury finally settled for and asked for just those two tapes. And last night, as a very last item of business, they listened to those two tapes, and this morning it was quite clear that vibrations came out of that jury room that a verdict was coming in quickly.
Were you surprised at the speed with which the jury dealt with this thing? After all, there was 17 complicated counts of perjury, obstruction of justice, and so on, and they talked only for 15 hours before reaching a verdict.
Yes, I think I was surprised that it happened as quickly as it did. I thought that it would probably take another day or two. They started out going that way. As I said last night, they asked for all of the tapes. The very first night of deliberations, they asked for all of the testimony as it related to John Mitchell, not only Mitchell's testimony, but the witnesses against them. And they were going at it the very long and thorough way. Excuse me, but they were turned down by Judge Sirica, who in effect threw them back on their own resources, their own recollections. And when the jury realized that it wasn't going to be able to review and retry the entire case, I guess that made them come up with some very quick decisions. The unity on this jury is something. Of course, the defense counsel always hopes to provoke an argument, a hung jury, to make one man angry and hold out one woman. But this jury had always stayed together very well, and with John Hoffer, the ex-policeman, as the foreman, they obviously ran a very tight ship. And they were under a lot of pressure, too, that the judge had put on them. We've talked about that in the past. They were cut off from television, newspapers, even phone calls from their families, which made them have nothing much else to do but think about this verdict.
Well, David, I'm sure that, like James Neal, you, too, would like to take the first airplane out of Washington after living with this thing for so long. Thank you very much. We'll have more news in a moment.
I believe in Excedrin because I've tried both regular aspirin and Excedrin for headache. And Excedrin's really done a better job for me. In fact, Excedrin did a better job in a research study at a big city hospital among hundreds of people with pain other than headache. In this research, the doctors reported Excedrin was significantly more effective than the regular aspirin tablet. Try Excedrin, the extra-strength pain reliever. I think you'll believe it's better, too.
Are you sure it's just itchy skin?
I was, but the itching got worse. My skin got dry, flaky. Even my students noticed. And then I thought, is it psoriasis? I checked. It was. So I got Tegrin cream. Tegrin felt soothing. My skin got better and kept getting better with Tegrin.
Are you sure it's just itchy skin? It may be psoriasis, so to relieve itching and flaking, get Tegrin medicated cream and feel good about your skin again.
Supreme Court Justice William Douglas is in serious condition tonight in Washington's Walter Reed Hospital after suffering a stroke while on vacation in Nassau. Douglas, who is 76, has served on the High Court since 1939, longer than any other Supreme Court justice in U.S. history. We have details from ABC's Bill Gill.
His doctors say that, barring a possible setback, Justice Douglas will recover. The justice and his wife, Kathy, were flown here to Walter Reed Hospital earlier today aboard a special Air Force medical plane at the orders of President Ford. The justice has been wearing a pacemaker to regulate his heartbeat for the past several years to correct what is described as a low blood pressure condition. Today, his colleague and close friend, Chief Justice Warren Burger, says that Justice Douglas is now resting comfortably, that he's alert, conscious, and optimistic. Officially, his condition is described as normal, following a severe but not critical vascular stroke. Bill Gill, ABC News, Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington.
President Ford named James Lynn, his housing secretary, to be his new budget director today. Lynn will succeed Roy Ashe, a holdover from the Nixon administration who's going back to private business. Lynn will continue as housing secretary until he's confirmed in the budget post by the Senate, probably late in January. Australian naval vessels arrived in the city of Darwin today with supplies and manpower to help restore vital services destroyed in last week's storm. Authorities said the 4 ships that arrived today will be joined later by 8 others and will probably stay in Darwin for at least 3 months. ABC's Jim Bennett is in Darwin, where a massive evacuation is continuing.
We're going to give priority to the following groups: mothers and their children. And please do not push, because there is plenty of room.
This is in the best Australian tradition, women and children first in evacuating Darwin. In less than a week after Cyclone Tracy leveled the city of 43,000, more than 20,000 had been airlifted out to other parts of the country. Most of them left looking back with horror on a disastrous Christmas Day and forward to an uncertain New Year.
How do I feel? Shattered. Lost.
How do you feel about leaving Darwin?
Well, I feel very bad about it.
Do you expect to come back, ma'am?
Yes, I hope so.
Certainly 1975 poses many major questions and problems for Darwin. It will take months, if not years, just to clear away the debris. The Australian government is forming a Darwin Reconstruction Commission to plan the rebuilding of a new cyclone-proof city. But the question in many minds is whether it is worth it.
I can't imagine ever living here again.
Well, we won't stay indefinitely, but we'll stay to see it sort of rebuilt to a certain extent so we can sort of help. Somebody's got to help. If sort of everybody just tears off, well, there's nothing left at all. There's nothing worth working for.
Essential services such as water and electricity are slowly being restored on a makeshift basis. The main pipeline is now the favorite watering hole for those who have stayed behind. These hardships seem to have brought the remaining Darwinians together in an appeal to their adventuresome nature. How do you feel about Darwin now?
Oh, well, I'm quite prepared to come back again, or we're going to stay until they force us to go out. But everything's fine. We're all happy and bright now.
Your plans are to remain in Australia for the rest of your life?
In Darwin, I hope.
The tragedy of Darwin will not soon be forgotten by the Australians. It's extremely unlikely that it will ever grow again to its former size. What probably will rise from this rubble is a city of 10,000 or so, designed to withstand natural disasters like Cyclone Tracy. Jim Bennett, ABC News in Darwin.
In Japan today, a bus carrying holiday skiers went off a mountain road about 100 miles north of Tokyo, plunged into a lake where it floated for a while, then sank. 36 passengers and the driver escaped, but 23 others were drowned. Fort Lauderdale police early this morning used an armored anti-riot vehicle to disperse some 1,500 New Year's celebrants who began pelting the police with rocks and beer cans. 42 people were arrested. It was the 3rd consecutive New Year's clash in Fort Lauderdale. If inflation and recession have gotten you down and you're thinking of a quick trip to Florida to get away from it all, you won't be alone by any means. ABC's Charles Murphy tells why.
At Jewfish Creek in the Florida Keys, cars, campers, and trailers backed up for miles. Northerners are scrambling south in droves to get some of that Florida sunshine and some sand in their shoes. Recession or no recession. Campsites are booked full, and many who came to the Keys had to be turned away.
Did he have some space? No, he didn't. He said probably no place there. Have to go back north. He's got maybe one spot, and if not, I think we'll be heading back.
It seems that everyone had the same idea about the same time. Let's hop in the old camper and go down to Florida where it's warm. No one will be there because there's a recession, you know. But they were here, and they came from all over.
We're from Pennsylvania. Montreal.
Fargo, North Dakota. How'd you come down? We drove down. A surprising number came from Michigan. Among them, unemployed auto workers. They draw sub-pay, and they don't have to work.
This weather, after 29 inches of snow up there in Michigan, I'm ready for this.
Well, you might as well be unemployed here as up there in the winter.
Sure, really. I mean, I'm getting by.
So far, it's a holiday phenomenon. Bookings drop off sharply after the end of the year. But even if business doesn't hold through the rest of the winter, things are better for the tourist industry than last year during the gasoline shortage. Even the big Miami Beach hotels are doing better than expected. Some are filled, though many still have rooms. Disney World has been doing a land office business. One day last week, the crowd set a record. More than 70,000 came to see the Magic City in the swamp. Disney laid on a bigger parade for the huge holiday crowds. In the land of make-believe, you can forget your troubles. Back in the 1930s, Will Rogers said Americans would be the first people in history to go to the poorhouse in an automobile. But times have changed. Now they're going to Florida first in a Winnebago. Charles Murphy, ABC News, in Florida.
Boston's school superintendent today postponed the reopening of racially troubled South Boston High School from tomorrow until next Monday because, he said, of secret information he's got up from the police about potential violence. Superintendent William Leary said he will ask the courts to determine whether the school should be permanently closed.
How the West Was Won. An unforgettable motion picture with an outstanding cast of stars. How the West Was Won. Sunday night at 7:30, 6:30 Central, here on ABC.
The North American beaver. Hunted to near extinction in the early 1600s, the lure of its lustrous fur stimulated the exploration of North America. The beaver faces yet another struggle for survival in the sub-zero temperatures of northern Saskatchewan. Join Captain Cousteau and the men of the Calypso as they follow the uncertain destinies of the beavers of the North Country.
Monday night at 8, 7 Central.
How do you wake up America?
With Bill Butel, Stephanie Edwards, and Peter Jennings. With news and commentators, information and entertainment. How do you wake up America? AM America, that fresh new morning show from ABC, starts January 6th at 7 a.m.
Catch the action on ABC 75. When you need help, you call the police. When the police need help, they call SWAT. A Miami-based task force fights crime in the posh resorts and remote islands of the Caribbean. Stacy Keach stars in Caribe. Robert Blake is Tony Beretta, a cop you'll never spot till you need him. Beretta. SWAT. Caribe. Beretta. The action on ABC 75.
Jim Catfish Hunter celebrated his acquisition of the fattest baseball contract in history by going deer hunting today near his home in Hertford, North Carolina. Last night, the 28-year-old pitcher was signed by the New York Yankees, ending his status as a free agent. His 5-year contract will earn him $740,000 a year. Queen Elizabeth's New Year's Day honors list cited some famous and some obscure individuals today. Among those knighted were actor Charlie Chaplin, novelist P.G. Wodehouse, and Roger Bannister, the first man to run the 4-minute mile. Also honored was Robert Brown, manager of the Europa Hotel in Belfast, which has been bombed repeatedly by the Irish Republican Army. The New Year in London was celebrated in traditional and in new ways. ABC's Hillary Brown attended a celebration where the attraction was music of nearly half a century ago.
Here's a number from the vintage years past, and it's called Nagasaki.
After the worst year since the war, the outlook for the next one in Britain hasn't been so bleak since 1931. Even government ministers are forecasting economic hardships in 1975 unequaled since the Depression. That may be one reason for the recent success of the Pasadena Roof Orchestra, a semi-professional group of part-time London musicians that specializes in the sound of the late 20s and 30s. Not a stylized, camped-up version, but the real thing, using the arrangements of 45 years ago. This year they came into their own with an engagement at Biba's trendy Rainbow Room in Kensington, itself a faithful restoration of the original Rainbow Room of the 30s, where people danced their troubles away and sang about pie in the sky, hot ginger and dynamite in places like Nagasaki. And for the first time since its heyday, the Rainbow Room was packed, mostly with people much too young to remember the bad old days. They rang in 1975 as though the 30s were only yesterday. With runaway inflation and rising unemployment on the near horizon here, the 30s could be back tomorrow. If this is so, the musicians of the Pasadena Roof Orchestra, and in real life they're truck drivers, accountants, engineers, and bakers, may be among the few who will survive in 75.
With all this depression and everything else we're going through, possibly so. And the outlook doesn't look too good for 1975, but I think the orchestra will be quite different in that respect. I think we're looking forward to a very successful year.
When the Pasadena Roof Orchestra started, they thought their depression music would be an antidote to the times, what the public needed. It may become an expression of the times, what people have actually got. Happy New Year anyway. This is Hilary Brown at the Rainbow Room in London for ABC News.
I'll have tonight's comment in a moment.
Electric shaving is fast and easy, except when you want a really close shave. Because to get a really close shave, you have to go over and over your skin. To help end this situation, there's Williams' Electric Shave. Its special formula makes your whiskers stand up, so you can shave off your beard without having to go over and over the same spots. Electric Shave. And now there's new Electric Shave Tender Face for men with tender faces. Electric Shave!
I know it's a big job getting settled in a new place, honey. Just don't expect to get everything done at once.
You're right, Mama. Things have been hectic, and sometimes I've had trouble falling asleep.
Everyone does once in a while.
I know. I remember you're telling Dad, Frank, take Sominex. And that's what I do. And Sominex really does help make me drowsy, so I can get to sleep, and with a lot less trouble.
Well, that's Sominex for you.
Sominex. It helps take the trouble out of falling asleep.
A unique feature of the just expired year 1974 was the epidemic I can think of no precedent for of fallen leaders. Among modern nations, there comes to the mind only Canada and Sweden that ended the year with the same leaders they began it with. Elsewhere, from the U.S. over to Greece and Israel on one side of the world and to Japan on the other, the leaders went. And not in most cases in regularly scheduled elections, but by popular impatience that forced resignations. Clearly, our kind of people were more desperately unhappy with leadership than in any year I can think of in this century. And with the sole exception of Chancellor Schmidt of Germany, opinion polls say that people are not very pleased with the new leaders they've got. Curiously, there may lie a grain of saving thought in that for the new leaders. The single main source of discontent is the inaction against the roaring inflation that has dragged us into a recession. Inflation means simply that people and nations are living beyond their means, and the allegedly unpopular remedy is cut back standards to fit your means and get control of things. Well, if the new men are unpopular anyhow, why not try the allegedly unpopular course of really biting the bullet and instituting sacrifices as a policy to recover? Who knows, unpopular measures, if purposeful, may be the way to popularity. In any case, it's more dignified to be kicked out because you acted rather than because you didn't. That's tonight's news and a comment. I'm Howard K. Smith. Good night.
This has been the ABC Evening News with Howard K. Smith and Harry Reasoner, Monday through Friday in color.